Hello, this is Chris Specht, and this is In Retrospect. Last summer, I posted a story called News the Old Days, hearkening of the days of Murrow, Cronkite, and Rather, when we could trust the news that was being reported to us each evening rather than dealing with the hyperbolic, sensationalized, opinionated, reality, or even false reality reporting that we see today. In a time when it seems that you can't trust almost anything you hear or read, including that which is spewed from the White House press podium, it leaves many wondering what is real news and what is propaganda. Last month, when President Trump tweeted the idea of a fake news award, we here at InRetrospect.com also thought it only appropriate to oblige Mr. Trump and Sarah Huckabee Sanders with an award that we called the 2017 Hitler-Goebbels Lugenpress Fake News Award. Admittedly, a combination of making a statement and a PR stunt on our part. But it also brings up a disturbing correlation between the Goebbels propaganda machine and the rise of the Nazi Party, along with President Trump's attacks on an honest and free press. A tactic we saw in the rise of dictators like Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini. Certainly not one we would have expected in a great democracy like that of the United States. Recently, while pondering what was real news and propaganda and the attacks on the free press, we decided to ask an expert, Assistant Professor of News Literacy, Judd from FGCU. According to his FGCU profile, Judd was a writer, reporter, and managing editor for 25 years before becoming a teacher. He has worked in radio, newspapers, television news. Cribbs won a regional Emmy Award in 1994 at WLWT-TV in Cincinnati. He has worked at the Cincinnati Enquirer and the Cincinnati television stations. He got his master's degree from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. He moved to Florida in 1998 to work at the local Fort Myers station WINK-TV. His main areas of interest include news literacy, media law and ethics, and broadcast journalism. Professor Cribbs also spoke at the Center for News Literacy at Stony Brook University's School of Journalism. In the comments section, you will see a link to one of these videos. It is well worth watching. Here is our interview with Professor Cribbs, also well worth watching. First of all, I want to thank you for meeting with me.
Yeah, sure.
As an independent blogger, it's very difficult to actually many times get through to credible people. The first question that I said I was going to ask you about was, in light of President Trump's attacks on the media, even calling the media the enemy of the people, do you find, and I hate to bring up the time of World War II and the events leading up to it, because so often that's a no-no topic. However, I see, at least myself, I've seen what I thought was a lot of correlation between the current administration's manipulation of the media and disavowing of the media. I see that correlation with the rise of that dirty name we're not supposed to say, Hitler. And do you see some of those same similarities going on?
I guess you could throw McCarthyism in there too. I think there's probably always been some sort of attempt by any government in power to control messaging. I don't think that that's an uncommon thing. I think the danger is when people can't talk to each other and have differences of opinions without it getting personal. And so when I hear of personal attacks, regardless of political stripe, I question why we can't have discussions about topics that matter to us, talk about where we disagree, talk about what things we question without it becoming personal attacks. In my experience as a reporter and writer for 25 years, I I did not, nor did I know anybody who specifically set out to manipulate a story to cause a certain reaction. There are inherent biases, those have been true since the beginning of time with news. For example, we all meet in a morning meeting, we say, let's cover X, Y, Z. Well, why are we choosing those? There's going to be inherent bias. We think it's interesting, we think it's of a public importance, so we cover it. But I've never known personally to have a reporter set out to serve an agenda first. I've never seen that. I've seen sloppy reporting, I've seen mistakes, but I've never seen any type of malicious, the story is going to be a means to an end. I've never seen that personally. So when I hear journalists, and it's happened to me when I've heard journalists get attacked, when I've been attacked, like, you're just going to slant this one way or the other. I never found that to be true, and it's disturbing to me because it's saying that what you're doing is simply trying to manipulate a message, when I never found that to be true for myself or the journalist I work with. And so one thing that I always think about is it works two ways, regardless of what the media is doing. And when you say media, that's a whole nother can of worms, because when I was younger, the media was the 3 television networks and 2 local papers and a handful of national papers. But now when you say media, do you count as media? Are you part of the media? Am I part as an instructor? Is someone who has a Twitter account, are they media? Is someone who has a really elaborate blog, are they media? Is the New York Times, we have to, what do we even define that as now? And so if you're taking whatever you see and using it to further your agenda rather than have a discussion about it, that's when I think the danger comes in. And I think you could just go throughout history and point out many examples of that.
So basically what you're saying is there are many forms of media, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a nationally recognized paper or television station, but as long as they're truthful in their reporting and putting an honest perspective on what's going on, at least to some people, then that counts as First Amendment media, whether they're quote-unquote credentialed or not.
Well, yeah, it's like citizen journalism. And I support that. I think that's a good thing, because we have this marketplace of ideas. They all go out in there. And the idea was back 150 years ago with the Supreme Court would say things like, the Supreme Court justices would say things like, the marketplace of ideas will settle out and people will kind of glom onto the things they think are worthwhile, and they'll let go the things they think aren't worthwhile. And so we have more voices now. We have many more voices. You have a blog site. You might be doing a complete 100% due diligence on everything you talk about. And you may have someone who has a blog site like yours who does no due diligence. And so I think rather than people attacking the media or talking about the media's doing this or that, I think the more valuable conversation is to say, how are people who are consuming this news checking to see if what they're getting is accurate, or are they just going for stuff they already agree with?
Well, that brings me to my next question, because news has gotten so hyperbolic at this point. To the far left, you have Fox News Channel. To the far right, you have MSNBC.
You mean, or vice versa?
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
And a lot of people like to stay in their comfort bubble. Actually, it's a two-part question. One, if a media network is partisan, are they still able to be unbiased and partisan at the same time, or is that the line where all of a sudden they've become more of a mouthpiece and a propaganda outlet for whatever side they're talking about? And then the second question is, what should the public do as far as their due diligence? How do they know when they're getting real news or fake news? I had a gentleman that was quoting a website telling me that a story I was doing was wrong, and he cited a website, and it came back to Albania. And I am not going to look at an Albanian website for credibility on U.S. political news.
Yes, and here's the thing. The first thing is any media entity could do anything they want if they wanted to push an agenda. I mean, you could make stories up and push an agenda. Again, I've never known it. I've worked in local news my whole life, so I've never worked in national news. I've never known any reporters to willingly do that. It's been sloppy sometimes and mistakes, but never, I'm pushing this agenda. However, there is, advocacy journalism. But I still would argue that that has to be based on facts too. So for instance, if you say the new streets downtown cost $10 million, I think that's a good use of money because we're going to have more traffic and blah, blah, blah. Or you say, I think that's a bad use of money because our sewer system's rotting and we should have used that money to rebuild the sewer system. That's completely fine, but both arguments are based on the fact that it costs $10 million to build those streets. What I think is dangerous is when we don't have a foundation of facts upon which we're debating stuff. It's just, you're wrong and I'm right, and that's all that's said. So yeah, I mean, you could push anything. But so what I was saying was, I think more so now, it's more important now than ever to really think about what are you reading and what am I supposed to do with this and how valid is this. When I've had disagreements over whatever, we'll say politics just for ease of an example, most of the time it's a misunderstanding. We're just not communicating about our ideas. There's some misunderstanding. It's not that much posed, because a lot of times we believe in the same things, but we're just not expressing them clearly.
The one thing that I have found that I'll get a positive response from all sides of the spectrum is when I'll sit there and I'll say, gee, I wish it was like the news the old days. When it was that half hour or hour of news, and you had venerated people like Cronkite and Murrow, and they would come out there and give you that news. And maybe at the very end, like at the end of 60 Minutes, you had Andy Rooney's little commentary. But it was more like the news was the news. Here are the facts that you need to know. You decide which way you want to go with it, but these are the facts as they could best be reported. And now it's like you get this tiny piece of news and then 30 minutes of hyperbolic commentary. I get to the point where I'll sit there and this goes for any of the networks. I'll want to find out what's going on with the Russia investigation. I want to find out what's going on with North Korea. I want to find out what's going on with the wildfires. But instead, they'll devote 50 minutes to what happened at one particular moment during the course of that day. And you listen to all this commentary, and at the end, you walk away feeling frustrated and empty because you don't know what's going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it behooves the person watching it to kind of do the legwork. When I think about the days of Cronkite, or even more recently, Rather, Brokaw, and Jennings, there were still people deciding that this is what is going to be news today. So there's still that going on. Like, whoever it was saying, this is what's going to be news today. And if it was outside their vision, you didn't maybe know about it. So I don't think that having all these resources is bad, because now the scope is much wider. I think it's taking everything at face value from that scope and just acting on it rather than thinking it through a little bit.
The amazing thing is, I don't know if you've heard of this young gentleman, but in my long search for non-biased, nonpartisan, direct reporting, I stumbled across a 13 or 14-year-old kid named Gabe Fleischer. Have you?
I've heard of him. I haven't seen his stuff.
He has a website called Wake Up to Politics. And I will sit there and I will go through that, and out of all the news I get in the country, this now 15-year-old kid who does the news from his bedroom has over 50,000 followers. And there is not a hint of partisanship in any of his reporting. And I was like, that's the way it should be. But how do you train your students to be able to be completely unbiased when they do that, and yet when they're seeing what all the major networks want is partisan biased commentary?
Well, you have to, first of all, make sure whatever you're doing is labeled properly. So if it's opinion, it's opinion, you know. But even in that case, I'd say you have to base the opinion on facts, you know. And when I was coming up through the ranks, and we know I reflect this in what I tell them, is your job is to dig for facts that can be proven facts and let the public know that these exist. So again, with the example about the streets, who knows if everybody knows that they cost $10 million and $9 million went to sidewalks and $1 million went to repaving the surface? That's something that maybe people would know because they'd want to speak out about that and say we shouldn't have done that, or that's fine, or whatever their opinion is. But you have to go down and get to the root of the issue by bringing to the surface the facts behind all the opinions. You can't go the other way. I mean, everybody has opinions about everything, but if the opinions are not based on facts, then what good is having the opinions? You're not basing it on anything. So, you know, and if you want to label it opinion journalism, even when I see opinions, I still check to see, is it based on provable facts, you know? So for instance, the street example, you could go through the city documents, contracts, and see how much it costs and how they subcontracted it out and where the money went, you know? For a person who has a regular job and is busy, they might not have the time to do that. They're working when City Hall's open, but that's what reporters are for. Their job is to go do that. So they go to City Hall during business hours and they dig through this and they say, hey, here's how much it cost. And then the people watching form their opinions about whether they think it was a good expenditure or not. That's how it's supposed to work, you know, I think.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, thanks for letting me talk to you.
Professor Cribbs, I thank you very much for taking the time
My pleasure.
to talk to me. And I'll probably be signing up for one of your classes.
Okay, yeah, come on and sit. You know, we have nice discussion. Every week we have several good discussions about these topics, so you're welcome anytime.
Again, I would like to thank Professor Cribbs from FGCU for sitting down and talking with us. It was a wealth of information, and the biggest thing I got out of it, I guess, applies to not only reporters, but citizens as well. Check your sources. Don't blindly accept what you see as being fact. Step outside of your bubble, verify the sources from multiple places, and make sure that what you're reading or seeing on TV, or even listening to on the radio, is real news and not fake news. I'm Chris Specht, and this is In Retrospect. Thank you for watching.